So today we're going to be talking about the 2000s. So we've already covered the 90s and the 80s, and now we're going to move into our next decade. And one of the biggest events to probably happen in the last 50 years was the September 11th terrorist attacks. Okay, and so on September 11th, 2001, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 airplanes with the intent to crash them into symbols of American democracy and economic power. So 2 of them crashed into the World Trade Center. Another one crashed into the Pentagon. Another plane was probably targeting something like the White House, but what had ended up happening was the crew and passengers of that airplane attempted to retake the plane. And in doing so, the terrorists decided to crash the plane. So the question becomes, why would anyone do such a heinous and destructive and evil thing? Well, the people responsible for this was a group known as Al-Qaeda, and it was run by a guy named Osama bin Laden. He and his group of terrorists, the Al-Qaeda group, had this fundamentalist, extremist ideology. They took Islam and they corrupted it to gain power and influence over people. Many Muslims thought that they were crazy and they didn't support the ideas of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Their plan was to get America out of the Middle East and to set up this empire, what they called the Caliphate, to implement their extremist ideology. And ultimately, this leads to what we call the War on Terror. So the September 11th attacks were perpetrated by these evil terrorists who wanted to kind of get rid of the American presence throughout the Middle East, their holy lands. So this War on Terrorism started in Afghanistan in 2001. And we went there because the government of Afghanistan, led by a group known as the Taliban, supported, or they gave aid to Al-Qaeda. They gave them safe haven in Afghanistan. And the American government said, hey, you give them to us so that we can, arrest them and try them for these crimes they committed against American people. And the Afghan government said no. So the United States launched an invasion in 2001 of Afghanistan. In 2003, it decides it's going to invade Iraq as well, because Iraq was suspected of supporting Al-Qaeda and having weapons of mass destruction. These events are kind of personal to me because I graduated from high school in 2003. I know people who served in the United States military following the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and with Memorial Day just a couple of days past now, 2-3 days ago, it's important to remember Memorial Day is a day that we celebrate to celebrate the lives of those who lost their lives serving in the armed forces. And so, a lot of people my age know people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we even lost friends over there. So Memorial Day is a special time, and it's important to remember the sacrifices of those who gave their lives for American democracy and freedom. Now, not everybody supported the war in Iraq because there was some debate over whether or not Iraq was involved with Al-Qaeda at all. We knew Afghanistan was, but some people, there was some argument that we shouldn't have invaded Iraq. There's some argument that we should have. Now, moving on to the more lighter stuff, social media was a big thing in the 2000s. So Facebook came out 2004, YouTube, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all these things really got their birth in the 2000s. And, a huge percentage of people used Facebook to connect with people, to share ideas, to meet, to find like-minded people, okay? Before the internet, if I wanted to meet someone who had the same interests in me, I just had to hope that they were in my class, okay? And if they were not in my class, then that's kind of it, right? With the internet, I could connect with people who shared the same interests as me, okay? So we use social media to share ideas. It can be used for things like political purposes too. So in the early 2010s, social media led to revolutions in some of the most undemocratic countries in the world. And so it can be used for good, but we also know that it can be used for bad as well. So people would use social media for bullying and stuff, and that wasn't great, okay? So we're going to talk about the last thing. We're going to talk about the Great Recession, and this was something that happened in 2008. Basically, remember we talked about the recession is when the economy gets smaller. Okay, so in 2001, what was happening were banks were giving loans to people they knew couldn't afford them, and so when it came time to pay those loans, the people couldn't do it. So when you get a loan, you have to pay the loan back plus a percentage of that loan. We call that interest. Okay. So if you have bad credit or you have a history of not paying things on time, you have to pay more interest. Okay. If you have good credit, you have to pay smaller amount of interest. Well, you can see the problem there. If I can't afford to pay higher interest, well, I'm not going to be able to pay it back. Okay. So basically, what happened was people couldn't pay the loans back. Okay. So people lost their homes. Well, now the bank was losing money because people weren't paying the home loans back, which means they couldn't make loans to businesses. And so businesses were now losing money and people were losing their jobs. So the Great Recession, you can see here how the economy is getting smaller. That is our recession. The economy is shrinking. And then we can see here the economy growing again. So the recession happens here, and then this is our expansion. Okay? So just to kind of compare, we talked about the average cost of things in the 80s. We can see income growing up in the 80s to the 2000s, and then today. We can see, remember we talked about the cost of a gallon of gas. It's going up in the 2000s, and it's coming back down today because remember, people are at home, so there's no demand for gas. So as demand goes down, price goes down. We see inflation causing the price of a movie ticket to go up. And finally, we can see the cost of technology going down, and we knew that was going to happen. Okay, so today what you're going to be doing is you're just going to keep on working on that decade project. So you should have the 80s, 90s done, and so today you're going to be working on the 2000s.